Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's kick off with a tale of corporate bean counting gone wrong and the employees who managed to turn the tables. Can't carry overtime to the next year? Okay, that works. I worked at a company that had a lot of people that had worked a long time there. It was pretty common for new chemistry or chemical engineering grads to come in as their first job after college. At 20 years, they got 6 weeks, 30 days of vacation. Some people liked to work and simply rolled vacation days into the next year. The max you could ever carry over was 45 days. At some point, some bean counter figured out that the 45 days were a liability to the company. If you're selling a chunk of a company off and those people have 6 weeks of vacation and another 9 weeks in the bank, that's 15 weeks of time that the new owner could be on the hook for. So they decided and put out a proclamation that there would be no carryover from one year to the next. Much unhappiness swept the company. Lots of people tried to plan how they were going to use it. One of the key people I worked with came up in October and said they're going on vacation and how much they liked working with me, which was kind of odd, so I pressed him a little on why this sounded like a forever goodbye and not a see ya in a week. So I got told, under strict confidence, that they had found a new job. New job started in 2 weeks. They had enough vacation days to cover them to January 1st, and the next year's vacation and holidays covered the first 2 months of the following year. So they were done. I wished them well, and they were gone. But they were not as good as I am in keeping secrets. There were suddenly a number of key people, also with 6 weeks vacation and large vacation bank, that were gone. Lots of unhappy people in HR. HR could not say no to close out vacation since they decreed the rollover freeze. But HR decreed you must return to work to be able to collect the vacation in the next year. Turns out most of the people got jobs in very cool companies. They all scheduled a vacation day so they could come back to work for a day. They came back en masse. Coworkers scheduled them all into meetings so they had things to do on the day. It was mostly a party day with an all-day food fest. As an added bonus, senior management had indeed planned to split off a division, and the sale fell through because of all the people that had bailed out. The kicker here is how HR's vacation policy backfired so spectacularly. By trying to erase a liability, they created a mass exodus of key talent. Not only did the people leave with their full vacation payouts, but the forced policy actually derailed the company's plans to sell a division. That's a level of poetic chaos you just don't see every day. And our second story. The Metro Chronicles. Shove Lady meets passive-aggressive karma. I did something kind of petty this morning, and now I'm feeling a bit guilty about it. For context, I'm an INFJ personality type, so I usually avoid confrontation and conflict at all costs. I can be passive-aggressive at times, something I'm working on in therapy, and tend to be a bit of a pushover because I dislike drama. Most of the time, I'm indifferent about things, but there are a few things that really get under my skin. One of my biggest pet peeves is how people behave on public transportation. There are 2 types of people in the world: those who wait for passengers to get off the metro before boarding and those who don't. Similarly, there are people who return shopping carts and those who don't. Same principle in my mind. I always wait for others to get off the train first, even if it means I have to sacrifice a seat or standing room. It's just good manners and, to me, a basic respect for other people. But then there are the folks who shove, elbow, or push their way onto the metro while others are trying to get off. That behavior absolutely drives me crazy. I know it sounds trivial, but it just really irks me, and I can't help but get upset every time it happens. This morning, as I was waiting by the door for the last few passengers to get off the train, a woman, let's call her Shove Lady, came out of nowhere and sprinted up the metro steps, trying to grab a seat. She was elbowing and shoving people trying to get off. At that moment, I just lost it. You can say anything to me, call me a stupid bee or run me over, and I wouldn't care nearly as much as I cared about someone jumping onto a train when others are trying to deboard. I get up the train steps, and of course, there are no seats left. Fine, it's not crowded, so I'm not bothered. Shove Lady didn't get a seat either, so in my mind, justice was served. She let out a sigh and leaned against the pole, stretching her ankle in her 3-inch stilettos and a nice suit, which I will admit I thought was stylish. 2 stops later, the person sitting in front of me gathers their things to get off, and I see Shove Lady eyeing the seat. I pretended not to notice, but the moment the other passenger stood up, I saw her grab her bag, trying to work her way around the people deboarding. However, the person got in her way, so I casually slid into the seat without looking up from my phone. Take that, shove lady. Then at the next stop, an elderly lady with a cane gets on the train, and of course no one offers her a seat. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I stood up to offer my seat. Just as I was about to tap the old lady on the shoulder, shove lady pushed past me and took the seat. I was furious. Not only did she take my seat, but she took it from an elderly woman who clearly needed it more than she did. At this point, I'm pretending not to notice shove lady, and it's just me and the elderly lady standing while she's sitting about 10 feet away. I could tell shove lady was looking at my phone screen. I was watching a show about 15th century Florence. Not very interesting, but I could tell she was eyeing it. It was starting to annoy me even more, so I decided to play a little game. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see shove lady looking at my phone again, so I quickly pulled up iMessages and texted my sister. Dude, there's this lady on the train wearing the cutest stilettos, but I swear to God, she smells like dead fish. I'm moving to a different car at the next stop because I can't stand her for the rest of the ride. It's really bad. I was getting off at the next stop anyway, but I just wanted to mess with her. As we reached my stop, I pretended to fumble around in my bag and accidentally dropped my phone right in her line of sight. I gave her a few seconds to read the message before I picked it up. When I glanced at her, I noticed her face had turned bright red. It was almost comical how embarrassed she looked. She quickly crossed her legs, put her bag on her lap, and I walked off the train. I know this was petty, but it felt kind of satisfying. Maybe it was just a moment of getting back at someone who irked me so much. And while I feel a bit bad for going that far, I can't deny that it felt good to have that little moment of revenge. I think what makes this story so relatable is that it taps into one of those universal frustrations we all have. People who think their time, comfort, or convenience is more important than anyone else's. And let's be real, public transportation is basically a breeding ground for these microaggressions that drive us insane. Shove lady didn't just push boundaries, she bulldozed them. Could you have risen above it? Sure. But sometimes a small act of pettiness can be cathartic when you're dealing with someone who seems to thrive on entitlement. And our next story. When a fence and a neighbor changed everything. My grandparents owned the lot next to their house. They just used it for more yard space. But when my sister and I were born, Grandpa knocked down the old shed on the empty lot and built a playground for us. Everything was made with his own two hands. It was a kid's dream, and we both played there any chance we got. And after we grew up, they let the kids of their neighborhood use the place to play with no issues. But then some years later, they passed, and the house went to my mom. I found out I'm expecting, so my husband, Andre, and I started seriously looking for a house when we'd only been half trying before. My mom suggested we buy my grandparents' house since we know it's a good place, and us buying it would keep it in the family. It's still in good shape, has no HOA, and is close to a good school, so we bought it for a steal and moved in ASAP. Right away, we noticed parents hanging out at the playground with their kids. We didn't mind at first and used the chance to introduce ourselves. Everyone was lovely and younger than I'd expected, but it seems a bunch of couples with kids had taken over the street in the past 5 or so years. The problem arose when neighbor Witch NW brought her kid over one afternoon. I happened to be by the window and saw a flash of red outside. It was a kid in a red shirt literally standing on the roof of one of the 2-story playhouses almost 10 feet off the ground. I ran outside thinking he was alone and said he needed to get down right now. That's when NW stormed over from who knows where and yelled at me to F off and not tell her kid crap. I asked if she was his mom, and after getting a yes, I asked her to make her son get down before he got hurt. She argued, saying I couldn't make them do anything, so I told her this was my property and yes, I could. That's when the kid fell. Thankfully, once he was halfway down and only onto the grass, but he still wailed like he was dying. He was fine. He got up without issue and ran over to NW. She picked him up and said if he'd been hurt, she'd have sued me, so I threatened her with the cops if she didn't leave. She flipped me off and called me a gin jockey. Random AF, I don't drink at all, let alone gin, but laughed. Andre was worried other people might try to sue us if their kids got hurt on our land. I hadn't even thought of that, so we put up a fence. Parents came by asking why the fence, So I told them why, and they can thank NW. I heard she's been shunned by the other parents, and none of them will let their kids play with hers. You did what was necessary to protect your property from lawsuits, and you told the truth about why you put up the fence. It's a shame that her kid's getting shunned, but it isn't the first time that a kid suffered for the action of an idiotic parent, and it won't be the last. In these days of having to pay ridiculous amounts for emergency medical care and of people suing whoever they can to try and pay for the ridiculously expensive emergency medical care, you'd have to be insane not to put up a fence and ban everyone. And our last story. Karen versus an old veteran with a pool. I, 37-year-old male, own a mid-sized company in our town. My dad, 62-year-old male, is a veteran who lives alone in his house with a small pool in the backyard. He built that pool 5 years ago specifically for rehabilitation. Due to his old combat injuries, he needs to swim regularly to manage his back pain. Honestly, thanks to his swimming routine, he looks about 10 years younger than his actual age. Everything was fine until 6 months ago when a new neighbor moved in. Let's call her Karen, 45-year-old female. She supposedly bought, or so we thought at the time, the house next door and immediately started setting things straight in the neighborhood by declaring herself the chairperson of the local HOA. Dad started calling me with his complaints. You won't believe this. This lady filed a complaint with the association saying that the water noise from my pool after 6 p.m. disturbs her peace. Mind you, there's a hedge and 2 fences between our houses. I thought he was exaggerating until I heard the next story. Son, today this woman leaned over the fence and started yelling, "It's inappropriate for someone your age to be splashing around in a pool. It's damaging the moral character of our neighborhood. What will the children think?" Every week he'd tell me new Karen stories. One time she tried to organize a neighborhood meeting about banning private pools. Another time she complained that water splashes were flying over the fence onto her property. She even called the cops once, claiming there was a suspicious elderly man swimming naked. Dad always wears proper swimming trunks. Last week I went to visit Dad. We were sitting on the porch when he pointed at a woman walking by. That's her, the neighbor I told you about. I nearly choked on my coffee. It was Karen Johnson, a middle manager at my company. On Monday, I requested her personnel file. Turns out there were numerous complaints from coworkers, rudeness, manipulation, creating a toxic work environment. HR had been keeping tabs on her, but they never had enough evidence for termination. After consulting with our legal team and HR director, we compiled all the complaints, conducted a formal investigation, and terminated her for inappropriate workplace conduct. Here's the kicker. We discovered she'd been presenting herself as a homeowner and HOA chairperson to everyone. In reality, she was just renting the house and had no authority to tell anyone what to do. Without a job, she couldn't afford the rent and moved out within a month. Now, Dad swims whenever he wants. He called yesterday laughing, "Son, you know what's the best part? Now I can play my favorite music while swimming." And nobody complains about Frank Sinatra disturbing the neighborhood peace. I hope this teaches Karen respect for her elders, especially veterans. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. We'll see you in the next one.